When you grab a company's annual report, your eyes probably go right to the financial statements. The balance sheet, the income statement, all the hard numbers. But wrapped around those numbers is a whole story, a narrative that management puts together to explain their year. Okay, so the numbers are audited, right? We trust that. But what about everything else? The glossy photos, the chairman's letter, the big promises about future strategy. Who's making sure that story isn't just a fantasy? Well, you might be surprised to hear that the answer is the auditor. And today, we're going to dig into exactly how they do it. So here's our game plan. First, we'll get clear on what we're talking about besides the core financials. Then, we'll look at the auditor's specific mission here. We'll see what happens when the story and the facts don't line up, how all of this gets reported to the public, and finally, why this whole thing is so important for trust in the markets. All right, let's dive in. To start, let's be super precise about what part of the annual report we're focusing on. We're talking about everything that isn't the official audited financial statements. And there's actually a technical name for all this stuff. It's called other information. Pretty straightforward, huh? It's basically the words that give context to the numbers, the commentary, the explanations, the company's side of the story. It's everything else in that report that's meant to tell you about how the company's doing and where it's headed. And believe me, this isn't just fluff. We're talking about some really important documents. That big, optimistic letter from the chairman, yep, that's other information. The super detailed management discussion and analysis section, that's in there too. The corporate governance statement, it all falls under this umbrella. This is the official story the company is telling the world. So where does the auditor fit into all this? Well, their job isn't just to check the math. They have an actual duty to read all this other information and give it a critical review. You can almost think of them as the official fact-checkers for the company's story. And there's a very clear process for this. First, the auditor has to get their hands on the entire final annual report, not drafts, the real deal. Then they have to actually read it, and I mean really read it, not just skim it. And while they're reading, they're looking at it through two very specific, very critical lenses. Okay, so this is key. The first lens is pretty obvious. Does the story match the numbers? If the chairman's letter is bragging about 20% revenue growth, you better believe the auditor is flipping back to the income statement to make sure that number is real. But the second lens, this is where it gets really interesting. The auditor compares the story against everything else they learned during the whole audit. Every conversation, every internal document, their entire understanding of the business. The question becomes, does this story feel true based on what I know from the inside? Now, here's a really crucial point. The auditor is not giving an official audit opinion on the chairman's letter. They're not auditing every single word. Their mission is to find what are called material inconsistencies. Basically, contradictions that are big enough to potentially mislead someone who's reading the report. It's a coherence check, a credibility check. But what happens when they do find something? What if the story and the financial reality are telling two different tales? Well, that's when a very specific protocol kicks in. Think of it like an escalation ladder. It all starts out pretty professionally. The auditor goes to management and says something like, "Hey, we noticed this sentence here doesn't quite line up with the numbers. Can you help us understand or maybe correct it?" But if management refuses to change it, the issue gets bumped up the ladder to the board of directors. And if the board also refuses to fix the misleading information, well, now the auditor has some very serious choices to make. And this slide shows you just how serious those choices can be. The ultimate step is for the auditor to just walk away, to resign from the job. This is basically the nuclear option. It sends a massive red flag to the entire market, signaling that something is so wrong that the auditor can't even be associated with the company anymore. So, assuming things don't go nuclear and the auditor stays on, this whole process has to be documented in the final audit report, the one that gets published for everyone to see. There's a dedicated section in that report just for this. In this section is very structured, for a good reason. It starts by saying management is responsible for the story, not the auditor. Then it lists exactly which documents were read, and this part is important. It includes a disclaimer, making it crystal clear that the main audit opinion doesn't cover this narrative stuff. But then it describes the auditor's duty to review it before finally giving the conclusion of that review. In a perfect world, this is the sentence you want to see. We have nothing to report in this regard. It's wonderfully boring, and trust me, in this context, boring is fantastic. It means the auditor read everything and the story lines up with the numbers. All is well. But if they climbed that escalation ladder and management still refused to fix a misleading statement, this is where the hammer comes down. The auditor is required, by the standards, to describe that inconsistency right here, in public, for every single investor and analyst to read. It is the ultimate tool for accountability. So let's zoom out. Why are we going through all this? It might seem like a small technical detail, but it's really not. This process is one of the fundamental pillars that supports the credibility of our entire system of corporate reporting. It really is a bedrock of credibility. So here's the bottom line. This whole process makes sure that the story a company tells is anchored in reality. It's a huge protection for investors against misleading corporate spin. And what that does is it boosts the credibility of the entire annual report, because it makes it clear that management is on the hook for every word, not just every number. So, the next time you open an annual report, don't just flip to the financials. Take a look at the story they're telling around those numbers. Because now you know there's a professional fact checker who's already read it looking for the truth. So the real question is, what other information are you going to look out first?